Hey, it's Nick, and welcome back to But We're Different, a podcast for revenue professionals who want to think differently about growing their business. See, the way people buy has changed, and yet most companies still haven't changed the way they market and sell. So our mission here is to help companies adapt to the way that people actually want to buy so that you can grow your business. Everything we share with you on the show is what we see firsthand from the 75 companies we work with every single day. The long-form episodes of But We're Different are recorded live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and if you'd like to join us, the link to register will be in the show notes. On today's episode, Zach and I talk through the consequences of not addressing cost and price, how to discuss price for highly complex solutions, and we highlight some specific examples of businesses, both B2B and B2C, that discuss price on their website openly and honestly. Now, on to the show. So let's just dive right in, Zach. Last week, we talked through how the majority of businesses like to hide from the content topics that their buyers care about most, and specifically how that kills sales velocity for businesses everywhere. No, if you want to check that out, that's But We're Different Live, episode 5. It's on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, all the fun places to check out content. But for now, I'll just give you a quick summary of what we went over then, because I think it's important context to wrap today's discussion in. So we as businesses tend to resist and probably most commonly ignore the changes that happen in the marketplace, especially as it pertains to the way that people buy things. And what ends up happening is that we hide from the things that are most important to our buyers. Now, if you're familiar with our framework, the Ask You Answer, you know there are 5 main topics that the majority of businesses hate to talk about, but every single buyer loves. We call this the Big 5. And again, nearly every buyer, regardless of industry, needs these things addressed before they're ready to make a purchase, and in most cases, before they're ready to reach out to a salesperson. So here they are, if you don't already know what they are. The first one is, how does this thing compare to the alternatives? Number 2 is, what are the potential problems with this thing? Number 3 is, what are other people saying about it? Number 4 is, what are the best options in this category? And number 5 is, how much does it cost? And the funny thing is that most businesses tend to avoid all 5 of these topics and leave a ton of money on the table. But everyone knows the number one question that lacks the quality answers is, how much does it cost? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So Zach, regardless of what products or services that we're talking about, you'll often find tons of content on benefits and features, but not cost and price. What is going on here?
Yeah, we've all been there before, by the way. I imagine at some point, any of us have been on a website, probably at some point this week, where you were looking at a product or a service, and up there in that navigation, you were easily able to find features or benefits or about, but you couldn't find pricing in that main navigation. So why does this happen? And what do we do when we don't find that? Well, at some point, we've all been there, right? You're on a website, you're trying to get a sense as to how much something is going to cost. You might not even be able to look, you might not be looking for a specific price, but you just want to know kind of what you're going to get into, but you can't find it easily. So in that moment, what majority of us wouldn't say to ourselves is, oh, I'm sure it's here somewhere. I'll just keep digging around until I find it. That's almost an insult to our internet intelligence, right? And this is majority of our customers, what they're thinking in that moment too. We probably aren't thinking to ourselves, you know what? I bet you this is one of those value-based businesses where I just got to pick up the phone and call them, and then I can get my answer. No, again, we don't pick up the phone and call in that moment, because in that moment, remember, we're just trying to find what we want and find it fast. So what do we do instead? We go back to the search engine and we keep searching. And we keep searching until we find the information that we're looking for. And generally speaking, once we've found the information that we're looking for, depending on who taught it to us, that's the site that we're going to spend time on. That is sometimes even the site that we end up buying from just because they gave us the information we were looking for, right? In these moments, we create moments of frustration for our buyers. That's the F word of the internet, by the way, frustration. It's not good. And we feel frustrated because we know that they know the answer to the question, but because they're not willing to give it to us, we feel like they are hiding it because either it's too much or whatever it is, right? There's a range of fears that we could tell ourselves that are associated with this. And so you may be hearing this right now, and you might think to yourself, yeah, Zach, that's how I am. So why aren't more businesses realizing this and talking more openly about cost and price on their website? Why aren't they putting pricing in that main navigation? I'm glad you asked, because we found that there are 3 major reasons why organizations won't talk about cost and price openly and honestly. And we're going to get into all 3 deep today in the episode. But the first major reason why we choose not to talk about cost and price is because we say, well, it depends. It's too complicated, Zach. I'm not selling gumballs here, right? I need to know a lot about the prospect before I can actually give them a price. It's really complex. Well, the only problem with that is if it's complex to you, it's probably complex to them too. For most of us, we'd be willing to accept the answer, it depends, but we need to know what it depends upon. So we can't take the easy way out and say, well, it's complex, so I just don't talk about it at all. No, a company that wants to earn trust says, I can talk about it and I will educate people on those factors. The second reason why we are oftentimes scared to talk about cost and price on our website is because we're afraid that the scary competition is going to find out what we charge. Everybody says this, by the way. I mean, almost every audience I've ever been in front of, when I ask them, so why do you think people don't talk about cost and price? Someone says, competition is going to find out what I'm doing. Think about that for a second, though, because if you ask that same person that says that, you go, do you have a pretty good sense as to what your competitors are charging right now, at least a rough idea? They say, yes, I have a pretty good idea. Well, if that's the case, is there probably a pretty good chance that they have a good sense as to what you're doing as well and to how you're doing your cost and price? So it's like this big secret, non-secret in every industry that everyone's trying to act like nobody knows what everybody else is charging, but in reality, everybody knows what everybody's charging. And by the way, why do we obsess more over the competition than obsessing over the customer that's right in front of us, who wants an answer? Third reason. Now, this is the big one. People will say, well, Zach, if we talk openly and honestly about cost and price on the website, and it looks like we are going to be more expensive, then we are going to scare the customer away. Now let's time out there on that for a second. We just said scare the customer away. Are they a customer yet? We ain't got Jack yet. And in reality, what actually scares us away? Is it when the company does talk openly and honestly about cost and price, or when they don't talk about it openly and honestly? Like we just talked about a moment ago, when we can't find that information, we go find somebody else who will give it to us. That's what scares us away. These 3 reasons, though, are prevalent. They're real. They are understandable objections, but it's our job to figure out how to get over those fears and ultimately go on to earn the trust that we want by talking about this openly.
One of the biggest objections is always about my competitors are going to find out, and they'll undercut my price. I think that's usually like what's on most people's mind. If we say a number, they're going to cut us. And this quickly becomes a race to the bottom, right? And it's a dangerous place to be in, because if you're already in a commoditized space, you're fueling the fire, right? But if you're not, if you're in a professional services space or something like that, in most B2B spaces, you're probably trying to fight against that. And when you start commoditizing what you do, you start ripping the value out, because now everyone's so hyper focused on price, and no one has a picture of what value is in your industry. No one has a concept for why some people might charge more, why they're way less expensive, and what's the delta, what's the difference there? Why is there
Yeah.
such a difference?
Yeah. It undercuts the principle at play here, because like you're saying, Nick, the principle is not to have the cheapest price, because it's not like everybody out there is just looking for the cheapest everything. There are many scenarios in which you don't want the cheapest thing, you want the best thing. And in order for you to understand what the best is going to cost you, you have to understand the factors of cost and price. Plenty of times I've talked with people, or I've worked with sales teams where not the cheapest option, yet still the best option. So us trying to think, well, the competitors could charge less. Anybody could charge less, but that doesn't mean that's in the best interest of the customer. In this case, just be looking for the lowest price. In fact, that's why we teach about this. We want them to understand value. We can't understand them to understand it the way that we do.
This is the difference between a business strategy and like a sales and marketing strategy, right? Being the lowest cost every time, that's a business strategy. You're telling people that, hey, we are the lowest cost plumber in the Nashville area, right? Whatever it is, like if that's your niche, great. But if you want the best value plumber, if you want the always on time, whatever the thing is, right? Using plumbing as an example, right? But the strategy is, if you're going to compete on price, that's your business model. That's not your sales and marketing strategy, right? And it's a very important distinction to make, right? If you can show exactly why they're cheaper, and if you want cheap, you probably don't want us. That's a conversation that thousands of businesses have every single day, because they're not the cheapest option, but they offer something different. So, Zach, what's the consequence of not doing this, right? We talk a lot about like why people should do it, and I think everyone kind of feels it, but like, how do you make a case? Because a lot of times people tell us too, they're like, look, I get it. I agree with this. I see myself in this problem, and I see the problem in our business. But it doesn't matter. All these other things are still true, and there's nothing I can do about it. So how do you wrap the problem up? And I'm not doing this thing.
Yeah. Well, I think you need to put the problem in perspective, which is that if you aren't the teacher on this thing, they're going to go and find somebody else who will teach it. And therefore you've lost control of the conversation already. In other words, if I own I don't know, let's say a music store, and Nick's got one across the street from me as well. Somebody walks in and says, how much on average am I going to pay for a guitar? And I said, well, I can't tell you that, but you could go talk to Nick, right? And he might be able to give you, look at that risk, right? They could go ask him about the factors. They could still come back and buy from me, but why am I going to go have him own that conversation? I want to own that conversation. I'm not going to send them away. That's what we're doing when we're not talking about it. We're sending them elsewhere to get that information. And that information could be false, could be misinformation. This is oftentimes what you see a lot of sales teams dealing with when they're getting pushback on price. Like if somebody says something is too expensive, expensive is a relative term. What does too expensive mean? It depends on what we're talking about, doesn't it? Right. So we don't want to give the control of the conversation over to anybody if we can be the ones to have that conversation. So that's the first problem here, right? If we're not talking about it, we've already lost control of the conversation. Second thing, and I just alluded to it a little bit, is if you end up being a higher cost or even a lower cost. Nick, let's go back to that thing you just said a second ago, the lowest cost plumber. I'd be skeptical of that too. How are you so cheap? Right? Like I've looked at four different quotes, and you are like half the price of everybody else. What is going on here? That's going to create skepticism too. So we want to be skilled at talking about the ranges, the variables, the factors, so that when we actually present our price and they're going, that makes sense. I understand why you are more expensive or why you are cheaper. We're all that way to a degree anyways, as buyers, right? When you want to know what makes something more expensive or what makes it cheaper, because there are times in which you'd pay more and times in which you'd want to pay less. We talked a little bit last week, Nick, about the trust gap and how not addressing these 5 topics widens the trust gap. I would say cost and price is one of the most significant gaps that we've got. I used the example last week of, can you imagine if you were driving past a gas station, and instead of a price up there by the street, it just said call for pricing. You probably ain't going there, right? That's too wide of a gap for you. And we talked about, to what degree do you need to trust somebody to book a call with them? To what degree does somebody need to trust you to walk into your store? To what degree does somebody need to trust you to fill out a form on your website? When we can talk about exactly what somebody's concerned about, we talk about the cost and the price. We help them understand what they should pay, how not to make mistakes. We close the trust gap and makes everything else much easier for us.
Let's unpack the trust gap for anyone who wasn't here last week real quick too, because I think it's an important distinction, or like important concept to understand, right? Is basically, there's on one end of the gap, you have the amount of trust you currently have in a business, or the amount of trust a buyer currently has in you. And on the other end, we have the amount of trust they need to reach out to your salespeople, to put the item in their cart and complete the order, to do whatever the thing is that you need them to do. And what the goal here is that we need to I use the analogy, get the boat closer to the dock, because people aren't going to make that leap to book a call if they think it's going to be a waste of time. You haven't earned that trust. If there's a risk that they're going to lose out on something, whether it's time or energy or effort, whatever the thing is, we need to get that boat closer to the dock and take away all of the fear, the issue, the worry, the doubt that someone may have to take that action, right? So we call that closing the trust gap. And every single business in the world has this trust gap. And the idea is that how do we address all of these things in a systematic and methodical way that moves the boat closer to the dock every single day? So I'm happy you brought that up, Zach, because the trust gap is probably one of the most like rampant, like prolific problems of just for buyers, is that, and they're trying to find information and information's not there. So one of the things that we hear a lot is, how do we handle this if our pricing is complex, right? Let's get a little tactical here. I think this is important because anyone who wants to do this thing and is going to be able to try and either pitch this to their boss or just try to set this up and they're saying they can do this, is how do we handle this if this is really complex, right? This is a customized solution. It's super complex. There's a lot of different variables. How do you shape this so that someone buying it can understand it?
Yeah. I'll actually take this to a higher level before we even talk about how to address this in content on your website, whatever. Let's talk about what we think we're supposed to do as salespeople when we have pricing that's complex. Because we think, well, if I just learn enough about them and I could just tell them, boom, here's your exact price, that's what they're looking for. But that's not exactly what they're looking for. In fact, this could lead to more indecision than it will to action. In other words, to the degree that I can give you information to help you understand the complexity of it, the more confident you're going to be in making a decision. If anybody here has read The Jolt Effect, it's a great book. I recommend you pick it up. They talk about, in that book, it's the authors of The Challenger Sale, if any of you have read that. In The Jolt Effect, they talk about indecision and how this stalls deals. We've thought for the longest time that if we just can get somebody not comfortable with the status quo, then we can just sell them something. But what stands in our way is the actual decision that needs to be made. And one of the major contributors, actually two of the major contributors to indecision, is a lack of information. So the prospect doesn't feel like they have enough information yet to make a decision. And the second is valuation problems. So they're not properly valuing the different options they have in front of them, or they're not properly valuing your solution. So we think, well, I just learned enough about them, I can give them a price. That's what they want. No, they want to understand why you got to that price. What was the algorithm looking like? They don't want to feel like they're missing out on anything. And so when we talk about the factors, for instance, let's say, I know Gabe here, he's got a window cleaning business. I used to be a window cleaner, so I can probably use this as an example. So when we're able to talk about, well, the way that we price washing windows is per pane, per window. And we also charge these fees, which is, the materials that we're going to be using. And there's, upcharges for these particular types of windows because they're actually truly divided. So there's many different panes, not just one piece of glass, whatever. If I can teach you all that stuff first, and then I say, and so based on that, this is what your price would be. I've already probably given you 90% more than any of the other window cleaning companies did when they just said, here's what the price is going to be. So we talk about what makes it more expensive. We talk about what makes it cheaper. We talk about why some companies charge more. We talk about why some companies charge less. And we tell stories about projects that we've seen in the past. We might tell stories like, we had a customer that came to us and they wanted X, Y, and Z. And so we gave them the price. They decided they wanted to go with a lower cost option. And then 2 months later, they came back and these were the problems that they had. And this is what it cost for them to fix it all up. And this is why we never recommend choosing the lowest cost option, because this is what can happen. We feed the logic. We give them the information. We help them value things properly. And by doing so, we get them out of that indecision. And we close the trust gap in the process, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's important to emphasize this point on when we're talking about the factors and things, right? From the marketing perspective, right? What role does marketing play in doing this? The role marketing plays is not necessarily, it can, but it not in every case, to publish a number to your website. When someone clicks pricing and they land on that page and it says our price starts at X, this is a possible outcome, but is not the one and only option. I think this is important to really dive into, right? Is that people don't necessarily need an exact price, right? They want the ballpark and they want to understand those factors. And if you, like Zach you were saying, if you can explain that narrative and why there's such a change and give people that range so that when they go to their boss and say, hey, we were only budgeting X for this to solve this problem, it's looking more like we're going to need Y. And now on the back end of that, right, your salespeople have a shorter time to close. Their sales cycles are infinitely shorter because we've seen they already come in and they have budget ready. They don't have to go back and reallocate things. They don't have to go back and go through procurement or go through any of the hurdles that they need to, because they weren't able to do that before they got to your sales team, right? So we see significantly shorter sales cycles when this is happening. So another question that comes up all the time, Zach, on this one is about discounting and other things, tools and tactics that salespeople may have access to that this removes, right? Like we're taking tools out of their belt, so to speak, by doing some of these things. That's how some people may feel. Is this true?
Yeah, discounts are an interesting thing because, well, we could argue all day about should you offer discounts and what does discounting actually do to the sales conversation, things like that. Here's one thing that we teach our sales teams that we train here at Impact is that when it comes to the minute you bring up discounts, you are already injecting into the mind of your prospect indecision because they're thinking to themselves, well, why wasn't it that to begin with? Right? If you could charge that, then why didn't you just start with that? And it creates just a bit of inertia when it comes to a sales conversation. What's better is that if the prospect for themselves is self-discovering that the less they pay, the less they're getting, right? Which is just true. That's not immoral to do that. In other words, so you said, let's say, Nick, you came back to me, you said, Zach, you look really expensive versus the other options. What I'm going to say is, so I'm glad you brought this up. And so as we've talked about this, you said you needed this, this, and this. And then we established that to solve that, we could do for you this, this, and this. Plus you're getting this. And you would think most companies would be 30, 40, 50% more expensive to do those things. The great news is we're only 10% more. Isn't that awesome? So now we're leading still, and we didn't lead with discounts. We explained the difference in value. What you could also do is say, if we take X, Y, and Z away, it could drop the price down. But hopefully they're thinking, well, I don't want to get rid of that. Okay, I'll pay for what the thing is worth. Again, we could have a long conversation about discounts, and there are certainly industries and there's scenarios in which you could offer discounts, but whatever it is, I think it's best that a prospect would be self-identifying, self-opting in for something lesser for a lesser value. That's just me.
This is also really specific to like a sales interaction where I'm buying from a salesperson. This is most common in a B2B or like some sort of like B2C home services thing, but there are plenty of people that are a commerce based thing.
Yep.
That there's low touch sales, or they can even be completely touchless. And I think the principle still applies, right? And it's that idea of showing, hey, you can buy the exact same thing, but it's not going to have X, Y, or Z. They're using different quality of materials, or there's a different quality of craftsmanship. You see this on advertisements do this really well. Amazon does this really well. If you have 2 pairs of leather boots and you're trying to justify why yours are $250, another pair is $50. I mean, it's in that space, we're pretty well adapted to understanding the difference in cost. But again, this is about principles, not necessarily the specific category or business model. Is that this principle still applies, that people just want to understand, are your leathers better? Have your craftsmen been doing this longer? Is it handcrafted? Do they use many machines? Like, do they have some sort of different thing that would justify me wanting to spend more? Is it going to last me 10 times longer so I don't have to buy a pair every year? Like, those are the types of things. Again, this is about principles, not necessarily the specifics on the category or type of business right there.
Well, this is a good example of where actually educating about cost and price can help you actually sell more things. Makes upselling easier, makes cross-selling easier. I'll give you an example of this. Marcus Sheridan, our friend and owner, on his website, if you wanted to go and hire him for a keynote speech, what you would find on his pricing page isn't just here's how much it costs to have Marcus come out and speak. You're going to be educated on the different ranges of speaking fees. In other words, zero, so free, pro bono. He's going to talk to you a little bit about the skills and expectations you could expect to get from a free speaker. Then let's say we go from 1,000 to 2,500. These are speakers that are just getting started. And here's some of the values there. And here's some of what you're not getting, but this could be a great fit for you. Now let's talk about the 5,000 to 10,000. Here's what you're going to see in that range. So think about just the psychology of this. If you're an event organizer and you're looking at that and you are seeing a price, oh, okay, so that quote that I got for 3,000 from such and such, they fit into this category. I'm not getting this, this, and this. If we pay a little bit more, look at what we're getting for that. And so in that moment, they could potentially change their mind on what they want to spend on that keynote speaker because now they understand the difference. This is where it pays to be the teacher. Literally, it pays because you're helping people understand the ranges within the industry. Not just what you do, you're helping them value the industry and what they should be spending money on. It's a really, really good example. Everybody go check it out too. And hire Marcus. Tell him I sent you.
A phenomenal example of this that everyone will know is Apple. Apple has price psychology down to like every time you try to buy something from Apple, they're like, oh, well, the next one's only an extra $50 and here's the difference and here's what you're going to get. And then you're like, you cross the mental hurdle to get to that one. And then like, well, hey, for an extra $50, you get this one. And that's how they create this huge range of products, but really they sell probably 3 to 5 of each type. This is a prolific thing that they have all these different ranges, and Apple has led the charge on that when it comes to like this price transparency and this price, like guiding people through that system. So if you have a really deep product lineup, Apple's a really, really great example on explaining the various differences.
Now, in that example, so the only beef that I have with Apple is when they release a new model, I guess you would call it, right? Whatever the next like edition is. Sometimes there's only very small changes that they've made, like model to model. Typically, the big changes happen like 2 or 3 models up. And they don't do a particularly good job. Like if I went there and I was like, I have this iPhone, whatever it is, X. I don't know what the models are anymore. Is it worth it for me to upgrade to this new one? They don't really do a great job of addressing that. Like that's what they could do a lot better. I bet you they'd have more people upgrading if they just talked about what you're getting in the new one. Or if they were able to say, don't do it. If you're this edition, don't upgrade yet. Wait until this. Because if you think about it, that's what the masses are looking. They're going to go learn about that from somebody else. Why isn't Apple being the ones to talk about it? Right? They could close the trust gap themselves. You might say, well, Apple doesn't have to, Zach. I'd tell you, well, again, they're outsourcing the teaching to somebody else. And I would say that's a problem.
That's a great point, because Apple, their model too is they batch out review units to hundreds of YouTubers that comb through everything you just described. And those people are doing the teaching and they're reaping the rewards. Not quite like Apple, but we get the point, right? So they're outsourcing the teaching of that thing to all these tech reviewers. And that's a huge industry, or huge category on YouTube. Michael has a really cool question. And Michael, if you want to come off mute and ask your question or elaborate, you're free to do so. Cool.
Sure. So you got to understand that I'm different.
Good to know.
I like that we got ahead of that right then. That was good.
Let's just get it out of the way now.
You know, I sell complex IT solutions to businesses, mid-size and large businesses. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of complexity, etc. So I definitely can do a better job describing the factors that go into the final pricing. But I think the tech industry has really conditioned these companies to expect a discount. And rather than talk about it as a discount, and after you give the factors and things like that, is it reasonable or advisable to indicate that we'll get the manufacturers involved in negotiating the best possible price for you? Or does that undercut credibility or put more indecision into their minds?
Well, this is a great one, Michael, because does everybody do that?
I think everybody in the tech industry discounts. Yeah.
They discount, but do they openly say, or do they even do what you're doing in sense of getting multiple manufacturers involved and helping them negotiate the best prices?
I think that, and Dale commented that he's a reseller too, maybe in the tech industry. I would think that everybody kind of does that, but maybe it's behind the scenes and it's not as open to the customer.
Yeah. So if you were able to talk about that more as a value add, would that be a differentiator for you while still because here's what I'm thinking, Michael. If people are conditioned within an entire industry to expect a discount, and that for the people they work with who are already on razor thin margins are going to continue to make it cheaper for them, then the question for us is, how do we make ourselves dramatically different in the way that we talk about those things? In other words, is anybody addressing the elephant in the room, which is when you talk to different resellers, one of the things they're going to do is to offer discounts in these few areas, and which isn't in itself a bad thing. In fact, we do the same, but what we find is the real value comes in this, which is helping to negotiate better rates with the manufacturer, right? Which we add in free of charge. Because then still, Michael, we haven't given power to the problem, which is more discounts is a good thing. What we've given power to is what they actually need, which is to get the best rates on the equipment that they end up buying.
And in that regard, we become their advocate.
That's
We
right.
become their ally. We're on their side of the table, working for the best price from the manufacturer.
Yeah. You become the teacher in that moment, in the guide. And
I like
that is, by the way, the goal with any of this. Sometimes it's not a matter of necessarily even being the best teacher about cost and price within the space. It's just addressing the things that we know they're thinking. We're not always going to have a great answer. We're not always going to have the answer. In other words, we can't always give them a price, but we can address it. And I find that so if you and Dale are in the same industry, you both are going to perhaps be in a position to teach about this, and you both will have unique ways of doing so. And there's enough space for everybody to teach in the way that it needs to be done. It's not necessarily a matter of always being the best. It's a matter of being willing to address the thing. One thing I've noticed in working with so many IT companies now at this point is that the more that we can do to explain just how the industry works, the better off we are with that customer. What I talked about earlier was where indecision creeps in is feeling like they have a lack of information. If I came to you and I said, Dale, I have 4 or 5 different quotes here from some different IT companies, and they all look the same to me, but some are very expensive and some are very cheap. I imagine you'd be able to give me a pretty good explanation as to why that is. And that would be valuable. And so the question is, how can we scale that? In other words, because somebody come to your website and learn enough about cost and price and the way the industry works that they would be able to understand that without having talking to you. That makes you dramatically different. And again, in an industry that's got at times razor thin margins, anything we can do to protect the price integrity is good. And oftentimes that just means talking about it more. So love the discussion. And that's why this is But We're Different, because we get to talk about the ways that we're different. Nick.
I mean, you're spot on, man. It comes down to principles over anything else, right? And the principle is, can you show it in a way that nobody else is willing to do? So Michael, you just listed off a whole bunch of different things about buying from you that I don't understand. But the most important thing is that you have the ability to teach about it in a way that no one else does. And that is an unfair competitive advantage when buyers are trying to understand a complex sale. Complex sales, I think, to Zach's point, indecision kills them because it just seems like it's just too much to be able to make a decision. There's just too much to figure out, and we don't have the time, and the problem's not that big. And so as you can chip away at that uncertainty, that's where you're going to win. As business operators, marketers, salespeople, whatever we are, we suffer from the curse of knowledge, right? We're so close to it that a lot of these things feel really obvious to us. And so, but they're not obvious to people who buy. And something that happens is that the problem isn't painful enough to overcome the frustrations that are completing the purchase. And that's where Zach's point, indecision, comes in. And so our job is to address all of those things so well that the person whose task it is to buy that thing can be able to put it all together and explain it to their boss who approves the budget or whatever the thing is, right? We want to be able to explain it that well in all the different formats and all the different places that they consume information. And so the idea is that, again, it comes back to the principle. Are we willing to share this and show this in a way that no one else in our space is? Because if you are, people are going to come to you because they're going to assume that you can solve their problem better than anybody else because you've done a thing that no one else is willing to do.
I want to add something else here, Nick, that's on my mind since we're talking about this. The one thing I've noticed about the trust gap, and a surprising thing that will close the trust gap that we don't talk about enough, is trusting the customer to make the decision and the right decision for themselves. In other words, there are small things that we do in the way that we communicate that actually show, I trust you, customer, that you're going to make the right decision for you. And so I'm not afraid to give you whatever it is that helps you make that decision, even if it means you didn't choose me. There are small things that come across in our communication that we actually show we trust them. And that actually closes the trust gap of them with us. It's almost like if you have a close friend or a mentor that you constantly take stuff to, you might take problems to them or things that you're dealing with in your life. You probably do that because you know that they're going to help. They believe in your ability to solve the problem, perhaps yourself. You're not going to go to them and just say, I have the answer. I know better. So you wouldn't keep taking stuff back to them in that sense. You take stuff back to people who help you discover the thing for yourself, who trust you to make the best decision for you. It's no different when we're in sales. When we're incredibly unbiased, we trust the customer to do what's right for them. We're willing to give them anything they need, even if it means they don't buy from us. That leads to this magical thing called trust. It's something we really don't talk about enough, but it's something you'll notice in very elite salespeople is they give that buyer agency to do what is right and not just listen to the recommendation or just do the thing that they're prescribing.
So this manifests itself in a really interesting way for our company. And I encourage everyone to look at your sales pipeline data after this to see if this is true for you, especially if you sell a highly differentiated solution, right? So what we do, just to give you some context here, what we do is we're adjacent to the inbound marketing agency industry. There's a group of businesses out there that will do all the work for you. We teach you how to do the work. And so we're adjacent to that. We are a different solution. And what happens is that people come to us a lot of times looking for the people to do the work for you. And what's interesting is that we present this choice. And to Zach's point, right? We give them the agency to make the decision for themselves. And we lay this all out and we have them go through this self-discovery process. And sometimes people make the other choice, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making the other choice. But the interesting thing, and the thing that I think you should go back into your sales pipeline data and look for, is what I call boomerangs. And this is the group of people that see your fork in the road and they take the alternate version. They go to the other category or they buy the other thing. And they come back 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, however far down the road that it is that people have, that it takes for your solution or the adjacent solution to run its course. They come back and they're like, guess what I just learned? And so this is just a super interesting thing. And of course, it's always a constant, it's always a constant improvement as a business to be able to, how do you prevent that from happening in the first place? But sometimes, no matter what, especially when you sell a highly differentiated solution compared to when people are comparing you to what people are comparing you to against you, it doesn't make a difference. People are going to make those decisions. And so go back, check out that data, see if you have a cluster of boomerangs yourself. And I'm willing to bet that there's a ton of opportunity there that you can learn from when you go back and watch those sales interactions and look how you educated and how you talked to those specific prospects. That's going to open up a ton of opportunity in terms of the way that you talk about your cost and your price and the value that you bring compared to the other solution. Because oftentimes those deals come down to cost and price and the understanding of value.
Great parenting advice too, Nick. You can spend a lot of time telling a kid not to do something, but the more you say you shouldn't do it, the more they're going to want to do it. So what if you just gave them the agency to choose?
Yeah, but less expensive mistakes depending on the situation.
Yes, this is true.
I always tell my A-month-old to don't go in the dog bowl, but he also doesn't know the difference.
Yeah.
All right, Zach. Any final thoughts here today?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. All right, we'll be back with another session of But We're Different Live next Tuesday at 3 p.m. and we hope to see you there. Everybody have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone.